So today we're going to talk about how to read Nietzsche. Nietzsche's probably my favorite philosopher, and I think in terms of this review, I don't think I'm going to talk too much about his philosophy itself, and more about what I think of these how to read type summary books, which talk about the author's work, and don't. It's not the same as like reading the original work. But very briefly, Nietzsche was a German philosopher in the late 1800s. I think he died in 1900, like on the dot, but he wasn't writing towards the end of his life because he went insane. He wrote in an aphorism type style, which is like a mini essay type thing, where it could be maybe like 1 to 3 lines to all the way to a couple pages. This is generally how he wrote. Not everything is like that. But the idea is you read it and then you are meant to sort of think with it and digest it. And a lot of his stuff is very thought-provoking and critical. So a lot of what he's doing is criticizing other stuff rather than trying to build some sort of system from the ground up, which is what a lot of other philosophers around his time sort of did. And specifically, one of his major contributions is thinking of historical context and development of ideas over time. For him, it was in particular to morality. He talked about how morality was necessarily going to change the way people evaluated it as a result of the Enlightenment, and people moving away from religion as being sort of the only bedrock on which to base morality was going to cause a sort of vacuum in moral thinking that was going to need to be filled somehow, or so I'm just going to briefly cover the chapters and maybe say a word or two on what they are. They cover different time periods through Nietzsche's life. He kind of focused on different things during various periods of his life. So the first chapter, other than intro and stuff like that, is the horror of existence. Then he has chapter 2, human all too human, historical versus metaphysical philosophy. So there we go with the historical. 3, Nietzsche's cheerfulness. So he had sort of an interesting effect. This book actually, there's an interesting part in this book where they talk about how Nietzsche kind of sort of oscillates between both joy in ideas and horror in ideas, and how both just cause like profound emotional responses in him as he was moving through them. On truth and knowledge, on memory and forgetting, life is a woman or ultimate beauties, the heaviest weight, the Superman or Übermensch, nihilism and the will to nothingness, and behold the man. So what this book does is it takes a major important sort of thing that is central to like Nietzsche's philosophy. At the beginning of each chapter, there's a Nietzsche quote, rather long in most cases. And the author breaks it down and then talks about the idea. So it's very easy to get the idea. And I think with Nietzsche in particular, this is a very useful thing, because Nietzsche can often just go on tangents, and he can sometimes contradict himself, and it's sometimes hard to kind of suss out what the big picture is in between like sort of aphorisms like I think this isn't Beyond Good and Evil. He goes on like a rant against Germany and like he says like the German Tsar is not fit to be my stagecoach, which I think is immensely amusing, but it's not like pertinent to Beyond Good and Evil. It might have been Genealogy of Morals. I'm not sure. It's as a sort of Nietzsche. I want to like talk a little bit about Nietzsche's ideas, and I think one of the more digestible and useful ones that someone can think about is his eternal recurrence. And so the idea is basically you are forced to live the same idea or the same life over and over and over again, and the metaphysics on it, I'm not abundantly well versed with Nietzsche's position in particular. I think it's somewhat ambiguous whether or not he actually believes it, but he thinks it's a useful sort of way to live one's life, to live as if you were forced to live the same life over and over and over again, because this would make you want to live it well. and I think one of like the justifications he tries to use is that if time stretches for eternity, eventually the exact same situation will happen again. Something like this. Don't quote me on that. But the important part is not the truth value or like the metaphysics of it. It's how it causes you to live your life differently, because it's in sharp contrast to Christian morality, which he is critical of, where his take would be you are living your life as a sort of entry or test to get into heaven or avoid hell, right? And that's the way you're living your life, as a means to an end. And if all you're ever going to do is live the exact same life again, you can no longer live your life as a means to an end. You have to like live it as the end itself, and you have to try and live a life that's going to be bearable, because you're going to have to do it again and again. And so this sort of way of looking at things can be both horrifying if you absolutely are mortified by your life, or very joyful if you enjoy your life, right? And so it encourages you to take the project of living your life seriously, because you're not going to just be like, oh, that's behind me, and not worry about it, because nothing's really behind you if you have to go circle back to it. And so it has this seriousness, but then the seriousness coupled with like a cheerfulness, which is kind of like this sort of dichotomy that appears often in Nietzsche. So let's get into the ratings a little bit. For utility, I give it a 6.5, not because I think it's going to be particularly useful in the context of everyday person's life. I really don't. This was a hard rating to give, because if you are not interested in the project of reading Nietzsche, I think the utility here is like a 3. You just avoid this book. It's like whatever. But if you want to read Nietzsche, I think that this is very useful as a way of getting into reading Nietzsche for a few reasons. First, he can be hard to sort of, because he's not like a systems philosopher and it's just like a bunch of kernels of ideas, it can be hard to form a coherent picture of what his big ideas are. Also because he sometimes contradicts himself. Two, a lot of Nietzsche's ideas are just different than like his other ones, and so it can help you decide what of Nietzsche you are interested in reading. Like in particular, there are sections from Human All Too Human I find are probably my favorite sort of stuff, where he just like exposes, it's just like all aphorisms about human hypocrisy, basically, and like man versus himself and man versus society are my two favorite sections, and that's like vastly different than Thus Spoke Zarathustra or some of his other work. So it could also help you figure out what work of his you would like to read. And third, I think Nietzsche is a philosopher where it is easy to misinterpret him, and this makes it a lot harder to commit that sort of error once you go in kind of knowing what the main point is. His work was used as propaganda for Hitler during World War II, except almost every single piece of Nietzsche's writing where he talks about Germany, he's just railing on Germany. He didn't live in Germany. He like left Germany and he moved. His professorship was in Basel in Switzerland. I think that's correct. But he wasn't a professor for very long. He had health problems. But the point is like a lot of stuff is anti-German. And then whenever he talks about the Jews, almost all of it is complimentary, but with like, it's complimentary in a general sense, but he is critical of some things. Mainly, I think it's like just post hoc analysis where the Jewish people are kind of like just get the shaft in Europe during the time period, and he's like, obviously they're doing something wrong or something like that. But generally, it's positive of their like working spirit and like that type of stuff. And so, or like creative spirit, I am not sure. Whatever he finds important to comment on the time. So, good for making sure you are not misunderstanding Nietzsche. For novelty, I give it a 5. if you aren't interested in Nietzsche, not reading this is like, I would give it a 1. It's like, it doesn't matter. If you are interested in reading Nietzsche, again, this would be a pretty good way to go, and maybe it would score significantly higher on novelty, but you can certainly approach Nietzsche without reading something like this, right? You could read, there are other, like, very short introduction to Nietzsche, or like the graphic guide Nietzsche. There are other ways to get into it without necessarily approaching the source material directly, or you can just approach the source material directly. For entertainment, I gave it a 6. I thought that it was, I really like Nietzsche. Maybe this score is just too high. I thought that the writer approached him in a way that was engaging and not, like, particularly, like, academic, I guess. Although I thought it was, like, thorough and, like, intelligent and coherent. But the main, like, point of these sorts of books is to be approachable. So I think the author succeeded. There are also some, like, details about Nietzsche's life that I find interesting, and so when he covers that, I find that I, like, enjoy that sort of thing. For style, I gave it 6.5. I thought that it was very well written, very easy to understand, which is really important in these types of books, because it's a book, How to Read Nietzsche, that by its very, like, branding and title, it's supposed to make things easy. And so, of course, and I think it succeeds, which is why it gets an 8.5 in readability. I think that, so people talk about, like, Nietzsche being a pessimist, but, like, that's, like, that's really not a fair depiction. It's a sort of, a much better depiction would be, like, an oscillation between pessimism and, like, optimism. Other people call him a nihilist, but he's not, like, Nietzsche's nihilism is not one of, we should be nihilists, nor is it that we end up as nihilists. It's a sort of, nihilism is on the journey of understanding, where you have to realize that there's, like, no point to anything, and then you have to overcome the nihilism in order to sort of actualize having your own tastes and values and moving towards, like, what you want. And the project is, like, the nihilism's not a necessary, like, consequence. It's, like, what you have to go through. And if you never go through the nihilism, he thinks you just don't understand the world right. And if you get stuck in the nihilism, you're also doing it wrong. You have to go through it. And nihilism is just the belief that, like, nothing matters. The broader picture of his view on morality is that the conventional understanding is wrong, and you have to first destroy that entirely, and then you have to reconstruct something new. So that's kind of where he's at with nihilism. Anyways, for interest, I gave it an 8. There's a lot of interesting tidbits about Nietzsche. I think that the way that the author outlines his ideas is very expedient. If you wanted to get just the main thrust of Nietzsche's ideas and just get the interesting stuff at a very expedient rate, reading something like this would be way better than just trying to approach his the source work directly. Like, not that I'm saying, obviously I like the source work, but, like, to learn about his nihilism, you could read his they're unpublished notes, but on, like, Will to Power, and it's like 500 pages, or there's, like, a 10-page chapter, right? So I think interest benefits a lot, not because it's, like, a complete picture of Nietzsche, but because it gives a sort of taste and allows you to know if you should explore it further, which I think is good. Anyways, if, as far as discussion goes, what do you guys think of Nietzsche? Who likes Nietzsche? And secondary question, does anyone else who reads philosophy also kind of, I wouldn't say rely heavily, but really enjoy the sort of basic introductory sort of work as a means to not trying to understand the philosopher more deeply, but being more time efficient in the time it takes to understand the philosopher? I'm a huge fan of these sorts of things. So for example, there's like the graphic guide series. This one's on Foucault, and it's like it's got pictures and stuff, but it only takes a couple hours to go through this, and I think pictures help you understand faster. It's like written at a high level. But those sorts of things, if you're interested in those sorts of things, feel free to comment about it below. If you think those sorts of things are bad, why do you think they're bad? Also interesting for discussion. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And also, have a good one.